Last week we got up to this part of the sugya where it ultimately we understand that. Bring up my little illustration. We understand that the Shulchanot, according to Rebbe, who holds that they're going from east to west, would have been situated something like this. So I have two rows of Shulchanot, and those would be the Shulchanot of Shlomo. And I have the Shulchan Moshe in front of them, toward the western wall. And from the northern wall to the first row, we have 2.5 amot. In between each row, we have 2.5 amot. And then we end up with actually 3 amot from the south side of the Shulchanot till the line. And Moshe's is in front. And the last thing that the Gemara said is that the Shulchanot are set up in a way, something like this. And the Shulchanot of Shlomo are in front of that of Moshe, like a student in front of the master. So Rashi said that he understood that to mean that the floor of the Heichal was on a slant. And that's why we could say it's like a Talmud before the master, because in a classical shiur, the master would be above, literally higher than the rest of the students. I saw, though, afterwards, Rabbeinu Gershom had a slightly different I have a slightly different understanding based on Rabbeinu Gershom, which is not necessarily that the floor was slanted, but that when you get to this part of the Heichal, the floor itself is just raised. And that would then obviate the problems that I remember Michael Werner brought up, that if in fact the floor is slanted, you're going to have, you could encounter difficulties in keeping the breads from shifting or from falling, which I thought was a good point. So that's one way of understanding it. I didn't find it. I didn't delve into this more deeply than to try to look at some meforshim on the page, and that's how I found Rabbeinu Gershom. That seems to be a reasonable. That seems to be a reasonable solution, although it's not so simple. And the reason it's not so simple, and again, I didn't see other people talking about this, is because we have the midot of the Beit HaMikdash, and so among the measurements that we have is the measurement from the floor to the ceiling. So if you raise part of the floor, does that mean you also are going to raise the ceiling? That doesn't seem to be the case, right? Because the Mishnah should have mentioned something like this. Otherwise, then the midot are off. Unless one of the things we learned last week, and it's not the only source for this, is if the measurement is less than a tefach, if you have less than a tefach of deviation, then that doesn't count. We're not concerned about if in terms of the midot, if there's less than a tefach of deviation. So this is one possible theory. If this area of the Heichal is raised, and the whole side, if it's raised by less than a tefach, then it would be okay. No one would be bothered by that, even though now the distance upward has shifted. It's now less than it was. So that's anyway. That's what I have to say about that. Let's continue in the Gemara, and then we're going to have to look back. I want to do a little bit of the Gemara, and then we're going to have to go back to the Mishnah here in the Nachos to understand this a little bit better. Tanu Rabbanan. So we learn in a brata, Sarash Shulchanot Tasash Shlomo, V'lo ayu misadrin ela al shel Moshe. Shlomo made 10 shulchanot, and they didn't arrange except on that of Moshe. What didn't they arrange? What needed
the breads on the shulchanot?
The breads, right? So for 10 shulchanot of Shlomo, but they only put the bread on the shulchan of Moshe. And what's the proof of that? Shneimar v'et shulchan asher alav lechem hapanim. So in Malachim, we have this pasuk, which I have down here in the footnote. Shlomo made all of the vessels for the Beit HaMikdash. Et michazahav bet shulchan asher alav lechem hapanim zahav. That upon it was the shewbread, zahav, gold, the shulchan, referring back to the shulchan, that the shulchan was gold. Okay, so what's the proof from this text that only on Moshe's was the bread put?
Of the singular pronoun.
It's a singular, right? And this is in Shlomo's temple. So we know that Shlomo had 10 more shulchanot, and in this descriptive verse, it says that he made the shulchan, he made the shulchan asher alav lechem hapanim zahav. Now, there's a problem with that, with this as a text, because the beginning of the pasuk is Vayas Shlomo. Shlomo made all of the kelim asher beit Hashem. But until now, we've been going on the assumption that the shulchan would be the shulchan of Moshe, which was not made by Shlomo. So this is a little bit puzzling, and I don't have an answer for that. But the Gemara wants to bring a proof from here that only on, in other words, what I could say is that only one of the shulchanot got bread. The other thing you might say in terms of the way the Gemara reads the pasuk, you have to say it might read like this: and then that he made all the kelim. It says at Mizbach HaZahav yet the shulchan. Those even. It's a little hard to read the pasuk like this, but it's as if it says at Mizbach HaZahav, or in other words, the second half pasuk is talking about kelim that were there already, in addition to the ones that Shlomo made, because also the Mizbach HaZahav was something that Moshe made. So that's a richtzayin. I need to look into that. Shlomo made 10 menorot, and they only lit the one of Moshe. Shenemar menorat hazahav v'nerotel ba'er ba'erev. And that pasuk is down here. This is a pasuk from Divrei Yamin. Maktirin Lashem olot baboker baboker. They were burning to Hashem the burnt offerings every morning, ba'erev ba'erev, and also the evening. U'torot samim ma'arechet lechem ala shulchan hatahor, u'menorat hazahav v'nerotel ba'er ba'erev ba'erev. כי שומרים אנחנו את משמרת אלוקינו ואתם עזבתם אותנו. Okay, so from the pasuk, it also sounds like that the only that there was only one menorah that was having lamps burning on, again because it's singular. So this is the opinion of the Tanna Kama, that there were all these shulchanot and all these menorot that Shlomo added to the Beit HaMikdash, but the only ones that were actually used were the ones of Moshe. Rabbi Elazar ben Shema Omer al kulam hayu mesadrin. He said they arranged on all of them. In other words, they put bread on all of the shulchanot. Shenamar at the shulchanot v'aleihem lechem hapanim. Right. So this is another pasuk there, right after, not right after, but in the same context, not of the previous pasuk, but of the earlier. The earlier pasuk was from Malachim. This is from Divrei Yamim. But again, it's a pasuk that we saw in context, that this is when it's describing the actual building of Shlomo's temple. It says, "Vayeshlomo kol hakelim asher beita Elokim." Right, so that's parallel to the pasuk in Malachim, that Shlomo made all of the kelim in the house of God, at Mizbach HaZahav, v'et HaShulchanot, v'aleihem lechem hapanim. So in the Divrei Hayamim version, he made all of the kelim, and the Mizbech, and the Shulchanot, and on them were lechem hapanim. So that seems to be a pretty strong case to say that they put lechem panim on all of the shulchanot. They lit all of them. They lit all of the menorot. Shnema, yet menorot v'nerotehem v'aram kamishpat v'nei advir zahav sagur. Right. So that's the next pasuk in Divrei Hayamim. And again, it talks about the menorot in plural, and it talks about burning those lamps, burning them in the plural. So it sounds like all of them were Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda Omer lo hayu misadrin ela shel Moshe. Rabbi Yossi says that they only put the bread on that of Moshe. Ela mani mekayem et hashulchanot v'aleihem lechem hapanim. So Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda says they only put bread on Moses. So of course we're going to ask from the pasuk that we just got from Divrei Yamim, but it says that the shulchanot were there, and on them was lechem hapanim. It sounds like the lechem hapanim was on all of the shulchanot. So he answers, Eilu shosha shulchanot shahayu b'mikdash. So those shulchanot that the pasuk in Divrei Hayamim is talking about are not the shulchanot of Shlomo that he made to imitate the shulchan with the lechem hapanim. Rather, it refers to 3 tables that were in the mikdash. Shnayim shayu ba'ulam mibifnim, lefetach habayit, echad shel kesef, echad shel zahav. Al shel kesef noten lechem hapanim b'chnisato, ve'al shel zahav yetziato. These are referring to 3 shulchanot that were also there for the lechem hapanim, when the lechem hapanim were, as it were, in transit. So there was a table, we mentioned this in at least one or two previous shiurim. There's a table in the ulam, which is the anteroom before you get into the hechal. So on the right, when you would walk in, there was a shulchan there. And here the Braita says it was made of silver. And to the left would be one that was made of gold. שניים שהיו באולם מבפנים בפתח הבית, אחד של כסף ואחד של זהב. על של כסף נותן לחם הפנים בכניסתו. So the Kohanim, when they were bringing the lechem apanim into the Beit HaMikdash, they would first put it down on this table in the ulam, and the one that was on the left, that's where they would put the bread that they removed from the shulchan in the hechal. That when it was removed, where did they take the bread? They took it and put it on this golden shulchan. Shemalim b'kodesh v'lo moridim, because we go up in holiness and we don't go down. Echad shel zahav bifnim she'alav lechem apanim tamid. And then what was the third shulchan? The third one was the shulchan zahav, upon which the bread was placed always, right? So that's the regular shulchan, or what we're calling in the context of this sugya, that was the shulchan shel Moshe. So, so then the Gemara is going to talk about how we know that we go up in holiness and we don't go down. I want to come back to that, but let's stay focused on this issue for a moment. So we have a machloket. So we have a machloket about whether or not these shulchanot and these menorot that Shlomo made, were they actually used or not? And if they weren't used, so why were they there? So I think, like Michael Schwartz said in the previous year, that's what they were there for, for like the glory of the Beit HaMikdash. So even though they weren't used for any practical purpose, according to the other opinion, they were all used. So what does that mean that they were all used? That is, does that mean, well, when it's according to the Rabbi Eliezer ben Shemo, he says, "Akulam hayu misadrin." They would put bread on all of them. So what does that sound like? What did they do? How many breads did they put in at any given time?
I mean, the usual amount times the number of tables.
That's what it sounds like, right? So the usual amount is how many? How many breads get put on the lechem, on the shulchan?
I don't recall.
Don't recall. Michael Schwartz?
I don't remember.
It's 12, right? There's 6 and 6.
It's
It means
relatively strong.
What? Yeah, it's, right, 12. So the way that seems to be saying that there's going to be 144 loaves of bread at any given time on all of these shulchanot, and that there would be at any given time 77 lamps lit on all the menorot. There's another way of understanding it. Al kulam hayu misadrin, that they put on all of them. And before we get to the other possibility, you might say that that might be problematic because the Torah talks about making 12 breads. So maybe it would be Bal Tosif to put in more breads. So this is something we've been going to. I told you there's a drasha that Chazal have that they say that Shlomo had, as it were, actually it's not 144, it'd be 11 times 12, right? So it'd be 132. Sorry about that. It's 132 and 77. So there is this idea that the Shulchanot and the Menorot were not a problem of adding on to the Torah because there's a remez in the Torah itself for the idea that those kelim you could make more of. So you might think that that would mean that if that's true, then they should all be useful, right? In other words, if already I can make more shulchanot, I should be able to make more breads for the shulchanot. But nonetheless, there's another way of understanding, which is the way we'll see Rashi understands, which is, and not just Rashi, the Ben Gershom, other people understand that al kulam hayu mesadrin means that they would use all of them, but not simultaneously. It means that at any given time, the lechem would be on one of them, but not necessarily always the same one, not necessarily always of Moshe. So then we could imagine, even though the Gemara doesn't say this, we can imagine, according to this opinion of Rabbi Elazar ben Shema, that there would be some kind of rotation, and they would, every week they would. But of course, that's also practically speaking, that's not so obvious that you would be able to do that, to change from one time to another. Because, as we'll see when we look back over in the Mishnah in a moment, this is a machloket Mishnah about about the tamidiyut. When it says lechem has to be lechem tamid. So according to the Tanakama, it means that there literally always has to be bread on the shulchan. And that when new bread was brought in, as one was being removed, the new one was being put on. So if that's the case, when could you ever change the bread to another shulchan? This is also, it's not clear to me. So maybe with that, I should take it back to the Mishnah. Excuse me. Oh. Okay, so we're here in the Mishnah in Menachot, Perek Yud Aleph. We went through this Mishnah Dalet a few weeks back. I'm going to read through it quickly. I want to go through Dalet, Hey, and Vav kind of quickly. So, oh no, we can skip Dalet. We'll do Hey. HaShulchan, right? So the Shulchan or Ko Asara, it was 10 tefachim long. Bo Chamishat was 5 tefachim wide. The Lechem Apanim was 10 tefachim long and 5 wide. Noten Orko Keneged Rachbo Shulchan v'Kofel Tefachim u'Mechtzim Mikan Tefachim u'Mechtzim Mikan. So each Shulchan is oblong, right? Or the Shulchan, or any of the Shulchanot were 2 amot by 1 amah. They were 2 by 1. 2 amot, according to Rabbi Meir, meant that it was 12 tefachim long and 6 tefachim wide. According to Rabbi Yehuda, meant that it was 10 tefachim long and um, 5 tvachim wide. But the idea is that the breads, according to that opinion, the breads, if you laid them out flat, would cover the surface of the shulchan, but they weren't laid oblong. The kelim, according to the Mishnah, right? The Mishnah goes according to Rebbe that the shulchanot were going from east to west. The length was going along the length of the bayit, but the breads were not going the length of the bayit. Their length was going over the width of the shulchan, and then they would be folded up. So you have to, in order to get a 10 tfachim long bread onto a space that's only 5 tfachim, so then you ended up 2.5 tfachim on each side, and now the bottom of it is now only 5 tfachim, and it'll fit on the shulchan. It'll fit on the width of the shulchan. So then we'll see that its length, in other words, the length now, right, because the length has been reduced by 5 tfachim, that will fill up the entire width of the shulchan. So he holds that the amah of the kelim was 6 tfachim. The amah that was used to measure kelim is 6 tfachim. So the lechem apanim, he holds is the same size as Rabbi Yehuda. It's 10 tfachim by 5 tfachim. But the shulchan now is 12 tfachim long and 6 tfachim wide. So he agrees that you also take the length, you take the bread lengthwise, and you're going to fold it up, but here now you only have to fold it up 2 tfachim on each side, because the bottom, the shulchan itself, is 6 tfachim wide. So out of the 10 tfachim, you're going to bend 2 on each side, and then that'll fit exactly on top of a 10 tfachim wide shulchan. The other thing, according to Rabbi Yehuda, when you stack them up, so you have 2 stacks of 6. According to Rabbi Yehuda, the shulchan is 10 tfachim long, 5 tfachim wide, and now each stack is 5 tfachim wide. So when you stack the 2 together, there's no space between them, right? Because each bread is 5 tfachim, so you have 5 and 5 is 10. So when I put both of them together, both of them are going to fill up the entire length, and each bread is going to fill up the width. So there's no space between them at all. According to Rebbe Meir, you're now going to end up with 2 tfachim in between the 2 marachot, the 2 orders of bread. Each one is 5. So that takes up 10 tfachim. And then if I put each one to one side and one to the other side, I'll have 2 tfachim in between them. And he says this, right? Tfachim revach ben, so there's going to be 2 tfachim space in the middle, and that's there. That's there so that the wind, the air can circulate. It literally will blow between them. So there'll be circulation between the breads, between the stacks of bread. And Abba Shaul he said that's also the place where the 2 holders of the Livona, frankincense, were put in that space. So the other Rabbanim said to him, Torah says that you have to put on the marechet being the order of bread, you have to put the pure frankincense. So they understand that to mean you literally put the frankincense on top of the bread. And so they're dealing with this idea that you will put it in between the stacks. And he says, right? But it also says elsewhere that the tribe of Menashe was next to him. And meaning alav doesn't always mean on top, it can also mean next to. He says, so I understand that's where the Psiche Levana were put. So that's just to remind us of that. Arba'as nifim shel zahav hayu sham, mefutzalim merash shayu somchim behen shnayim l'seder zeh, shnayim l'seder zeh. So there were 4 snifim of gold. And so the snifim, so for this, I mentioned Michael Werner, if you heard this, there's this interesting website, the Showbread Institute. You can look at this. This is a real place, which I just found out for the first time exists today. And here they have like workshops and but you know what? I don't have to take time. You can look. They even make actual breads on the spot, and they have workshops for kids and for adults and all kinds of practical, interesting things. One of the things that they spend time on, and I didn't go through all of this, they do talk practically how was the Shulchan built. So these snifim, this is generally agreed that the snifim, right, are these the snifim are going to be these things, something that's going up on each side. You have to have 2 opposite each other. Can't think of the word in English for them right now. And also, as you'll see,
maybe.
What?
Columns.
Yeah, let's use columns. Right, let's use columns. That's actually fine because it's vague enough that we can use it. Right, so there are these 2 columns on this side. There'll be 2 columns on the other side. As we'll see in the Mishnah, and also just from the pshat of the Torah, we understand that there are these half tubes, these chatzi kanim, chatzayei kanim, that are going to go from one side to the other, and then you're going to put the bread on top of those. These are there in order to hold the kanim that are going to hold the bread. But it's not clear exactly what the configuration is. So they bring some different possibilities that people have come up with. This is another possibility. This is another possibility. This is yet another possibility. And then they talk about the kanim, and they come up actually with a very interesting idea, which is that these were all that the bread actually didn't sit flat, that it sat at a curve. I'm not going to go into that, and I haven't finished reading it. It's actually a very interesting idea. However, this is what the Mishnah is talking about when it's talking about the snifim. And I'll point out another difficulty which I still don't understand, don't know how to answer, but let's go through a little bit more. So there were these 4 snifim of gold, the futzalim merashehem. So they were the futsal, right? They were I can't think of the word. How did they translate? I apologize. Split, right? They were split at their upper ends, right? A pitzul is a split. So the idea is, so you have like a column here and a column here, and then there would be on the there would be it would split up. In other words, there'd be gold, right? They were made of gold, so some of the gold would be split, so there would be perpendicular to the column itself. And now you have things to rest him on top of. That's the idea of these pitzulim. Right? So arba snifim shel zahav hayu shem mefutzalim me'roshehem shehayu somchim behem. They would rest on them. They would rest the breads on them, and as we'll see, they were actually resting on these chatzi kanim. Shnayim l'seder zeh, shnayim l'seder zeh. So there were two snifim on this side, two snifim on this side, or right next to each other. There were 28 kanim, kechatzi kaneh chalul, like a hollowed out half reed. Arba'asar l'seder zeh, arba'asar zeh. There would be 14 kanim on this side, and next to another 14 kanim. How were the kanim arranged? The idea would be that you have, okay, so the first lechem would be, the first two lechamim would be sitting on the shulchan itself. So they don't need kanim to hold them. Then above them, you'd have 3 kanim on each side. But we'll talk about just one ma'arechet. So above the first one, you have 3. And then you have the second bread on top of that. Then on top of that, you have another 3, so that's 6, and you have the third bread on top of that, right? And then it goes on. See the first 4 breads get 3 kanim, and then the last bread at the top gets 2 kanim. So the first bread is on the shulchan. This third, fourth, and fifth breads are eating on 3 kanim, so that's 12 kanim, and then the top bread, the 6th bread, is going to rest on 2 kanim. Presumably, right, because the top one doesn't need as much. The breads actually were kind of one on top of the other. Gemara talks about this in a little bit more detail. For our purposes, that it's good enough to understand it like that. And then it says, like arranging the kanim or removing them does not push away Shabbat. There would be a problem with doing that on Shabbat. Rather, the Kohanim or a Kohen would go for Shabbat and remove, but leaving the bread in place. He would remove the kanim on Erev Shabbat, and then from Friday afternoon until Shabbat morning, the breads would literally just one on top of the other, without anything in between. Now, I also have to admit, I believe that the halachic problem of removing or putting on the kanim is possibly a problem of binyan, right? It's like building something, or it's a problem of makeb patish, which is like to finish off a kli. Right, because when you put them on, that would be like the finishing touch to the shulchan. But to avoid any Shabbat issue, they would remove them before Shabbat altogether. Presumably, when you're moving the breads, you don't want them on. But now that we've come this far, I'll explain to you the questions that I still have. I still don't understand this, and I didn't get. Admittedly, I did not go through their whole discussion here. I don't understand how the breads were put on and taken off. Let's go to the next Mishnah and we'll see. Shnei shulchanot hayu b'ulam mibifnim al petach habayit. So this is what we saw referenced in the Braita just a moment ago. There were two tables ulam inside and inside of the ulam at the opening to the bayit, where it's at the opening to the heichal. Like the ulam is right in the heichal, and then there are two shulchanot there. Echad shel shayish, echad shel zahav. One was made of marble, and one was made of gold. What did the Braita say? What were they made of?
Gold and silver. Gold and silver.
Right. So one of them was silver and one of them was gold. So we'll talk about that in a moment. But let's just go with what it says here. So on the marble one, they would put the lechem apanim when he was coming in, when the kohen was coming in. They put it up on the gold one when he was coming out. Shema'alin b'kodesh v'lo moridin. So because you go up holiness and you don't go down. So what's the going up in holy here? What's the raise in holiness? Or the rise?
Silver to gold.
Holiness? Presumably from silver to gold. So if you're going to take something that's kadosh, like the mapanim, and you have to move it to different areas, the next area that you move it to has to be considered to be more important, more precious. So we understand that gold is more precious than marble. That would be gold. It also raises a question because it also raises another question in my own mind, which is, so what's the idea? It's going to go from a marble table, then it'll go on to the shulchan, which is gold, but then it's going to go to another gold table. So that, how do you fulfill a ma'alin? It doesn't go up past gold, right? Once it's on the shulchan of zahav, then it doesn't go up more important than gold. Like they didn't have platinum. That wasn't something that they, that was a material that. But it could be like this: that the idea of ma'alin b'kodesh isn't from it's not from the marble table to the shulchan inside. The idea is that bread, when it's not on the shulchan, it's going to go from marble, and then next week it's going to go to gold. Because what happens? So they come in, they're going to bring hot bread, baked bread, and they're going to set it down on the marble table. And then when they're ready, the next day they're going to bring it in and put it onto the shulchan itself. So that's described here. Arba kohanim nichnasim. So 4 kohanim enter into the heichal. Shedam shnei starim. So what were the 4 kohanim there for? 2 of them held 2 rows of bread. So there were 12. 2 kohanim are each holding 6 loaves of bread that are presumably stacked one on top of it. And the other 2 kohanim are going to be bringing in the incense holder, the frankincense holders. V'arba'a makdimim lifnehem, 4 go in front of them. Shnayim litol shnei starim, u'shnayim litol shnei chim. There would be another 4 kohanim who repeated them, and those would be the ones who are going to remove the bread that is there currently and the bzichei levona that are there currently. So how is that done? Hamachnisim omdim b'tzafon ufnehem. So the people who are bringing in the new bread are standing in the north and they're facing south. The people who are removing the bread are standing in the south and they are facing north. Elu moshchim v'nichin. So these are pulling. People in the south are pulling, and the people in the north are ninichin. They're putting in the new bread. This tefach corresponds to the other one's tefach. So I have, let's say, a bread, and I have the new bread. So as one is being removed, another one is being put on, right? So at least like within a tefach, one gets pulled off and one gets on. And why does it be that way? Because the lechem described in the pasuk, lechem panim lefanai tamid. You place on the shulchan the lechem hapanim before me always. So we just idea of what does tamid mean? Does tamid mean, Michael? What were the 2 words?
Continual and continuous, or continuous and continual.
Right. So were they there?
Continuously
or continually? Is that right?
Yes.
So wait, which is which? Continuously would mean?
All the time.
And continually means?
Repeated.
Repeated, like, but in kind of regulated
regularly.
Fashion.
Regularly.
Very good. So the Tanakama here holds like the idea that it's continuous, that there literally always has to be lechem hapanim on the shulchan. He says no, even if these and the ones in the south remove the bread, and then the other ones, and then the shulchan is temporarily empty, and then the other people put on the new bread, that's okay. Abzu haytat tamid. So he understood it to mean continually. Now, here's my problem. I still don't understand how they did this. And let me bring up my measure. So now I have Kohanim here. Let's say they're doing it just on this one of Moshe, right? So I have 4 Kohanim have come in, and they're getting ready. They're getting ready to do the following things. I have 2 Kohanim here in the south. Actually, let's do it. Let's make things. I have a Kohen here, let's say, and a Kohen here. They're there for removing the bread. And opposite them, I'm going to have a Kohen here and a Kohen. You know what? Let's just do it like this. Something like this. I'm going to have these are the two new Kohanim. Now there's another two behind, let's say, next to them or behind them, probably next to them. I made these Kohanim a little bit fat. Because the people who are two Kohanim are going to be here, and they're going to be here to move the Bezichim, which are in the middle, and to bring in the new Bezichim. Okay. So now, we were looking just a moment ago at different possibilities about how these snifim worked, these columns worked. But if you'll notice, let me go back to that. Go back to that picture again. Every one of these is designed in such a way that you can't pull off a bread without it hitting the snif. And the Mishnah says explicitly, you have two people in the south, two people, one is pulling off and one is pushing on. And it's not from the side. It's clear that it's not from the side. The other reason it's not going to be from the side is there isn't enough room. Even according to Rebbe Meir, who says that there's space between these two ma'arachot of lechem, it's only 2 tefachim, and each bread is 5 tefachim. It's clear from the Mishnah that you have to, you have somebody here, and you have somebody in the back, and somebody here, and somebody in the back, and one is pulling off, and one is pulling south, and one is pushing south. Said it. I haven't. The only way that I can conceive of this is if, now see what they did here. They said that the snif, let's say it's something like this. It sounds, if it's something like this, where it's really like what they made, they call it a snif, and they said there are 4 snifim. So according to this design, the snif is like 3 poles. One snif equals 3 poles. And the only way I can conceive of this is, remember, they've removed the connectors from one side to the other. They removed the tzikanim chalulim that go from one side to the other. Those moved on Erev Shabbat. And now the breads are literally stacked one on top of the other. So the only way I can kind of conceive of this is if the poles were slightly wider than the bread, and that you could remove the middle pole. But I don't know. I flipped quickly through their article here. I didn't see them do this, but it might be somewhere else on their site. To me, this is like a real puzzle. I've been puzzling over this for a long time. I don't understand how they did it. I don't understand how they did it. By the way the breads, these are the breads. According to in the Gemara, they talk about this idea. Like in the Mishnah, we had this idea that they're folded up, but then there is an idea that they get folded again, which we won't go into. It could have been something like this. So in short, I don't know. I don't understand. The only way I can or that if we look back and let's go back to the Mishnah. When it says in the previous Mishnah, Lo sidur kanim v'lo netilatan dochet Shabbat, maybe they didn't remove just the kanim. Maybe they removed the snifim along with the kanim. Because the truth is, if you do that, then that's fine, unless the way unless the snifim are actually also functioning as legs. But as you see, there is an idea that they're not the legs. There's a machokas in the Gemara also whether the sneak all the way down to the floor or not. It could be that this extended from the top of the shulchan upwards. So as we're speaking, maybe the thing that makes the most sense that when they went in on Erev Shabbat, they actually dismantled the snifim and the kanim, and they just left the bread piled up. The other question is, so let's say that's true. It sounds like from the Mishnah that they move the breads one at a time. But that would be really, really hard because each Kohen is holding, when they come in, they're holding 6 breads. So then the other way of understanding it is that actually the Kohanim in the south were pulling all 6 loaves at once, while the Kohen in the north is pushing on all 6 loaves at once. And that could be done. But otherwise, Kohen doesn't have enough hands. How can he hold these 6 huge loaves of bread and then push, you'd have to carefully push, the guy in the south is going to have to carefully pull one loaf of bread. He's going to have to edge it along while the other guy pushes in one loaf of bread. It just seems highly, highly impractical. Like I don't see how it could be done.
If they remove the snifim, the kanim, the loaves actually collapse down on themselves, and then they're much more back.
That's what I'm assuming. That once you remove the kanim, the breads will be literally one on top of the other. That's for sure.
And not just one on top of each other, but that they actually like the boxes, the bread box themselves actually settle down. So they actually are much more so that like each individual loaf is more compact, and so the whole stack is more compact.
And what do you gain from that? What are you trying to get from that?
It becomes much more easy to shift.
To shift all 6. Or to shift. In other words, my question is, did they do one at a time, or did they do 6 at a time?
Right, it would solve the problem that it'd be easier to do all 6 at a time if each individual loaf settled.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I think whether the loaves were settled or not, it's going to be easy. It's going to be easier to do 6 at a time. That's not what I think is awkward. That's the scenario that's not awkward. The scenario that's awkward is if you do one at a time. That seems to be impossible. So it sounds like this is how it must have been done. It must have been that they did all 6 at once. And that's why they had to remove the kanim before. Anyway, that's how it must have been. They must have done 6 at a time. I've gone over this many times, and I don't see it being furash, but that seems to be the only way it could have been done. That's kach ralafiyam yudatim. So there must have been a way of not, when it says that they removed the kanim, I think it must have been also removing the snifim. Pardon me. Anyways, that's tzarich tzat iyum. let's just finish off the Mishnah here. Yatsu v'natnu al shulchan shel zahav shaya b'ulam. So then the southern Kohanim who are taking the old bread, they're now going to leave the Eichal and going to put that bread on this golden table that's in the Ulam that we mentioned before. So they're taking last week's bread, they're going to put it on the golden table on their way out. So why are they putting it down at all? Because before the bread can be eaten, they have to burn the frankincense. So the other two Kohanim have come out with the two bezichim that were put there last week with the frankincense, and that's taken to the Mizbeach, and it's burnt on the Mizbeach. As far as I can tell, that was all burnt. That would be burnt on the outer Mizbeach. I tried to verify that, and I think I did find some source with instead of being Purash. Somehow it seems obvious to everybody except me, but before the bread could be eaten, the matir for the bread, that which makes the bread permissible for eating, is that the fence gets burnt. So once the frankincense is burnt, then they can take the bread and distribute it to the Kohanim. So then the chalot would be distributed amongst the Kohanim. Chal Yoma Kippurim Yot Shabbat. If Yom Kippur fell out on Shabbat, achalot nitchalkot la'arev. So then they couldn't eat the bread, right? So let's say it's Shabbat Yom Kippur. They still have to do this exchange of the breads. But of course, even after they burn the frankincense, they're still not allowed to eat the bread, but they can distribute the bread at night. Chal Yot Erev Shabbat, if Yom Kippur fell out on Erev Shabbat, so if Yom Kippur is on Erev Shabbat, so the bread, fine. So the bread you're going to eat on Shabbat. But since we're talking about it, what about the Seir Chatat? So the Seir Chatat of the Musaf of Yom Kippur, which we mentioned many times before, that actually was a chatat that could be eaten. But how do you eat it? It gets shechted on Yom Kippur. The blood gets sprinkled on Yom Kippur, and if it was in Yom Kippur, then you could roast it and eat it. But it is Yom Kippur, so you're not allowed to roast it for the purpose of eating it on Yom Kippur, because it's not part of the mitzvah to actually eat that chatat on Yom Kippur. And then, right after Yom Kippur, it's Shabbat, and you're also not allowed to cook on Shabbat. And you can only eat it for one night. You only get one night and one day before it has to be either consumed by people or it gets burnt. So what do you do? Shabbat, so Yom Kippurim Nechala Arev. If Yom Kippur falls out on Erev Shabbat, then the Seir Shel Yom Kippurim is eaten in the evening. Habavliim ochlino to kishuhu chai imnei sheda'atan yafa. And the Bavliim would eat it raw because they had a strong constitution. They would eat the raw meat. Gemara here, I think we talked about this in another context. The Bavliim here was actually just a derogatory term that the Chachamim used talking about the Alexandrians. The Kohanim from Alexandria were the ones who would eat it raw. And because the Chachamim at that time were not enamored of the Chachamim from Babel, they called anybody that they felt was sort of like boorish, they called them Bavliim. Anyway, okay, the rest of we don't do. So this is just to lay out more or less the way all this got done. Let's go back now and understand. So in our sugya, it says what we're concerned about here is how many shulchanot got used and how many menorot got used, mainly shulchanot, right? Because the Gemara here isn't going to go through all the things with the menorot right now. So just to remind us, so the Tanakama here says that Shlomo made 10 shulchanot, and they only put bread on the one of Moshe because it says that the shulchan asher lav lechem apanim zahav. And et shulchan lashon yachid. So they put it on the table. It's a singular. So it means that bread was only put on one table. And Rabbi Elazar ben Shimon says no, that bread was put on all of them. Rashi says al kulanim misadrin pa'amim bezeh, pa'amim bezeh. Sometimes on this one, sometimes on this one. That is, all of them got used, but they weren't all used simultaneously. So again, I don't understand exactly how that works because, at least according to the Tanakama that we saw, there always has to be bread on the shulchan. To the extent that as you're removing the old bread, you immediately have to put on the new bread. So how can you ever get from one shulchan to another shulchan? So I could make an argument, but it's not obvious, right? It could be that it's not so much that it has to be on a single shulchan, but that as you're removing from one shulchan, then at that same moment, bread has to go on to another shulchan. According to Rabbi Yossi, he holds that it could be continual. So in other words, I could remove all of the bread from one shulchan, I could put the new bread on another shulchan. In any event, Rabbi Elazar ben Shimon says that all of them are used, but they weren't all, according to Rashi, they weren't all used simultaneously. They would only put 12 breads in every week on a single shulchan. And he brings his proof text. Because it says that and that also all the rods were used, and he brings the pasuk for that. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, they only put bread on that of Moshe, and how do I understand the pasuk that says that that there was bread on the shulchanot in plural? So that refers to the 3 shulchanot that were in the mikdash. 2 of them were in the ulam, and then of course the shulchan itself. So Rashi says Shnaim shayu b'ulam mibifnim etzel petach ha'echal, near the opening of the echal, echad shel kesef, echad shel zahav. One was silver, one was gold. V'hai dekare hacha kesef v'matnin shayish mishum deshayish lavan kekesef. So it seems to be a contradiction because in the Mishnah it says that it was a marble one. Welcome back, Michael. Rashi is explaining how it could be in the Mishnah that it says that the shulchan coming in was marble, and here in the Bright it says it's silver. So he says that the one that they're calling silver, and the one in the Mishnah was called marble because it was really marble. It's just that it was called silver not because it was literally silver, but it was silvery. It was because the marble is white like silver, or not necessarily white, but right, very light and shiny. So that's how Rashi squares the 2 sources. The Chnisato, so on the silver one, the silver/marble one, the Kohen would put down his bread when he came in. Rashi says, they would put it when they come into the ulam, they would put the bread down for it to air out, right? For like to have it circulate with the air. And then on the way out, they would put them on the gold table. Rashi says, so the bread would be put on the golden table until they burnt the frankincense, as we mentioned. Shmalim b'kodesh, kigon b'chnisato menicha al shel kesef u'kshami l'hecha mesader al shel Moshe shemitzupe zahav harei aliyah lo moridim v'kach b'tziato menicha al shel zahav. So when he comes in, he puts it on the silver one, silver/marble one. Then he goes into the Eichal, he puts it on a gold one, which is the Shulchan of Moshe. And so that's obviously going up, and it's not going down. And L'kach v'yitziato menicha shel zahav. And therefore, when he leaves, he has to put it on gold. So that would be the way Rashi understands Ma'alin b'kodesh v'lo moridin. You go up in holiness. It doesn't mean that each time you have to go up further, but that once you have gone up, you cannot go down. So when it went from silver to gold, so then the next place that you put it also has to be gold. That's Ma'alin b'kodesh v'lo moridin. Gemara here, it's almost 9 o'clock. I'll try to go through this quickly. The Gemara here then says, it's a continuation of the Brighton, Menalan de'ein moridin. So what's the source to say that we don't go down holiness? Amar Rebbe Amar Pra, because the pasuk says Mishkan. Moses put up the Mishkan. He placed the Adanim and the Krashim, the Yitenet Brichav, like the long bolts, Vayakam et Amudav, and he put up the columns. So he put it up and up and up and up. So at no point does he take anything down. It's not clear exactly what the proof of this text. Rashi gives these pshatim. Vayakam Moshe et Mishkan, midureishe v'seifi d'krab hakama. Since the pasuk begins with the language of putting up and it ends with the language of putting up, it means that even in the zchut lashon, in this expression of language, the clarity of this expression, taken down. Shma mina ein moridin. V'inami, another possibility. Delo sayahu achad hakohanim b'kamdim v'adanim. Another possibility is that Moshe literally did everything himself. He didn't have any help from his brothers, the Kohanim. Shma mina ein moridin. And I learned from that you don't go to holiness. And it was because Moshe was at the top of the line, so nobody helped him. Since he was the Aliyah, that Moshe built the Mishkan. Therefore, nobody else busied themselves with this. Nobody else did this work of putting up the Mishkan. And that, of course, that's the drasha that says in the pasuk, Vayakam Moshe at the Mishkan. So if you take it literally, it means that Moshe literally put up the entire Mishkan. This is another thing which I don't understand exactly how this could possibly work, but it says another possibility is to understand that we don't go down in holiness is because it says Vayakam Moshe to Mishkan. Rashi says that could mean the Hainu Yiriyot. It meant that he put the Yiriyot that were the top of the Mishkan, they were first. Shabbat Chila Poresa HaYiriyot. First he would put up the Yiriyot, the Loho Ridan, and he didn't bring down Ba'akamat Amudim Ba'adanim. Yiriyot Biyado Ad Shehikim Kulam. Rather, he held on to the Yiriyot until he put everything else up. That's even a little more bizarre to my mind than the first pshatim, but okay. That's supposed to be source, the idea of Hakamata Mishkan is for not going down in holiness, that you can only go up. Minalan Dema'alin, how do I know that you go up in holiness? In other words, that you have to go up another level in holiness if you go from one thing to another. Amar Rabbi Yaakov bar Yaakov Damakra. This we learn from Korah, from the story of Korah. Et machtot ha'chata'im ha'ele b'nafshotam yasu otam mikuei pachim tzipui lemizbeach. Ki krivu mizne Hashem v'yikadeshu v'yulu ha'otig me'em. V'yikdashu. What? So this is right. The kahal, the 250 people who were with Korah, all brought these incense holders. Right? They were all called to bring incense holders, and then of course they were all killed, but the incense holders were left behind. What does Hashem say to do with their incense holders? That they were supposed to be beaten down and put as a coating on the Mizbeach. And so the Braita explains, B'tchila tashmishe Mizbeach. They started off their life as Kelim as being servile to the Mizbeach, right? Because they're holding incense, which is supposed to be burnt on the Mizbeach. Yachshav gufo shel Mizbeach. So the only thing you can do with them now is to bring them up a level. And what would that be? To actually make them part of the Mizbeach. And now along these lines, bring another drasha. The Gemara brings here another drasha. Asher shibarta v'samtem ba'aron. This is this idea of ein moridim. The pasuk. This is talking about the luchot, and the luchot. We'll see soon. It's later on in the Moshe is telling the people, "V'achtov al haluchot et hadvarim asher hayu al haluchot harishanim asher shiba v'samtam ba'aron." This is in Moshe's retelling of the story of what happened with the Shvirat HaLuchot. We're in Dvarim Yud, Pasuk Aleph. It says, at that time, sold me Psal lecha shnei luchot avenim karishonim. Carved two tablets of stone like the first ones. Va'alei elai ha'ara, go up to me on the mountain. To the mountain, v'aseh lecha aronei, to make an aron of wood. V'yachtov and God says to Moshe, I will write on the luchot et hadvarim asher luchot harishanim asher shibarta. I'm going to write the words that were on the first tablets that you broke, v'samtam ba'aron, and you place them in the aron. So he tells Moshe to make new tablets, come up the mountain, and also to make an aron of eights. Now, whether this was the same aron as ends up in the Mishkan or a separate aron is subject of some controversy. We'll leave it at that for the moment. We're more concerned about reading the second pasuk. So the second pasuk says that Hashem says to Moshe, I'm going to write down the words that I wrote on the first ones that you broke, right? So the Asher Shibarta is referring to the Luchot HaRishonim. Then the pasuk ends up by saying the samtam ba'aron. You shall place them in the aron. So what is Moshe going to place in the aron?
Both the intact luchot and the broken luchot.
So one way of understanding it is it refers to all of the luchot. That once the way the pasuk is constructed, I could understand the Samtam Ba'aron refers to the new luchot only, but I could also understand that it refers to the luchot harishonim, asher shibarta. So that's the way the Braita here understands. It understands the second way. And it says, asher shibarta v'samtam bara. Right? So it slices that part of the pasuk. That which you broke, and you shall place them into the aron. Tani Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef learned melamed shahaluchot v'shivrei luchot munachim ba'aron. So this teaches us that both the luchot and the broken luchot were placed in the aron. Mikan letalmid chacham sheshachach talmudo mechamat onso. So from here I learned that a talmid chacham who forgot his learning through perforce, right, by some accident or with something against his will, she'ein noagin bo minhag bizayon. We do not treat him in a degraded way, in a degradatory way. So this little learning here is brought in the wake of our discussion of Ma'alin B'Kodesh V'lo Moridin. So how is it pertinent to the idea of Ma'alin B'Kodesh V'lo Moridin?
That a Chacham, in some sense, retains the sense of Chacham, even if because of some force majeure, he's lost his learning.
So how does that relate to Ma'alin B'Kodesh V'lo Moridin?
So he raises in status, he raises to become a Chacham, and he doesn't go down from that status.
Right, very good.
Right.
And so he is, and we learn it from the Luchot, right? And why would I learn something about a Talmid Chacham from the Luchot?
When he's in the full force of his knowledge, he's like the intact luchot, and when he's forgotten something.
In what way? In what way is he like the luchot? Is he made out of stone? Why is he like the luchot?
He's Kodesh.
He's Kodesh, or let's make it tighter. A Talmid Chacham who is an embodiment of Torah. Right, so like the respect that you give a Talmid Chacham, it's not respect for him per se. You have to give respect to all people, right? But you have to give greater deference to a Talmid Chacham than other people. You have to stand up when they walk in the room. You have to address them in the third person. There are certain halachot that are pertinent to a Talmid Chacham. And why? He's a person like everybody else, because he is a literal embodiment of Torah. So just like the Luchot were a physical embodiment of Torah, the Talmid Chacham is also a physical embodiment of Torah. So just like the Luchot Rishonim are broken, but we still keep them, because what Michael said a second ago, because they had achieved this high status of Kedusha. So, lo moridin, not only are we not morid, they inherently do not come down from that status. And that's the same for the Talmid Chacham, even though the reason we gave him deference before as a Talmid Chacham was because of his Talmud, because of his learning. And now he doesn't have the learning anymore. So you might say, okay, I don't have to respect him like a Talmid Chacham anymore. But no, once he achieved that status, lo moridin, we don't bring it down. It can't be brought down.
It could be also said, maybe.
Also what?
Maybe it could be said also that, when the Luchot are broken, the letters themselves are not lost. I mean, they're simply fragmented. And that...
Actually, well, go ahead.
And that when somebody, as it were, loses the knowledge, it's not so much that knowledge is lost altogether, but in some sense it's fragmented.
That could be. It's an interesting idea, but the reason I'm not sure is we don't know exactly how how many pieces the luchot got broken into and how they broke. But again, bear in mind the letters of the luchot were not actually on the luchot. Each letter was carved all the way through stone. So once the luchot are broken, the letters are gone. It's not like they were etched on, and then I had a letter here and a letter there. The letters, to begin with, were not there, except for the fact that they were surrounded by intact stone. So I don't know. I understand what you're saying, but what I'm saying doesn't necessarily contradict what you're saying in any event, because I would just tweak it a little bit. I'd say that, in other words, all the parts are there. It's just that they're not in a recognizable order anymore. So whatever, we don't assume that he literally, it's an interesting idea, right? And maybe he didn't literally lose his Talmud, but he can no longer access it, can no longer put it together.
Maybe I would suggest, sort of tweak it slightly differently, and say that maybe this is the difference between recitation and interpretation. That when we're looking, say, for a proof text, we're actually taking passages from text and juxtaposing them in a way that's quite different from the linear, from how they appear in a linear fashion when we're reading going verse to verse to verse inside the text. And so, in some sense, when the broken luchot and the Chacham who's as it were forgotten his knowledge, in some sense, what comes to the foreground is this act of interpretation.
I'm not really following.
In recitation, you have this verse and then this verse and then this verse. In interpretation, it's almost like hypertext. You're jumping verse to verse to verse, and not necessarily in a linear passage. And so when the
luchot broke, before the luchot broke, what obtained?
Sorry?
Before the luchot broke, what obtained? That the verses were one after the other. Is that what you're trying to say? Before the luchot broke, that verses are all together straight. And after they break, then what?
The process of remembering does not happen in the same linear fashion that it would take if we were actually reading the physical embodied text. So, like, piecing together fragments is piecing together fragments of a text is like almost like an exercise in hypertext.
The reason I'm not quite grasping what you're saying is because one of the things that the Talmid Chacham, before he loses his Talmud, is like the luchot, right? That's the metaphor, right? So one of the aspects of the Talmid Chacham is that he doesn't read the text in a linear fashion alone, right? That he does interpret the text. That's before the luchot are broken. That's why he still has his Talmud. So that's why I asked you, before the luchot are broken, what are we saying? The luchot themselves are presented in a linear fashion. So the Talmud, to make, if you're going to go in that direction, then I have to say the Talmid Chacham is like the luchot before they're broken, and then he learns in a linear fashion. After they're broken, then I would say he learns in an interpretive fashion, but that's what we understand the Talmid Chacham to do when he has his Talmud. He learns in a non-linear fashion, as well as a linear fashion, before he loses his Talmud. It's just that after he loses his Talmud, he's no longer capable of learning. Just the same way that we understand that the luchot, after they're broken, we're no longer capable of reading them to learn from them. So I don't see how your metaphor works. Recitation and interpretation, those are both things that were there when the Luchot were intact and when Chacham was able. Those are both things that are there. And after the Luchot are broken, none of that is there. After the Talmid Chacham loses his Talmud, none of that is there. That's how I understand it.
So maybe I would actually say, so maybe I conceptualize it the wrong way. Maybe I say sort of recitation/interpretation versus association. That once the luchot are broken, like we've seen, like when we spend time with somebody who is elderly and a little bit addled, there's a kind of associative. It's not simply that there's not simply a kind of forgetfulness, but there's also kind of associative density. Like sort of there will be like sort of different things sort of come drifting. So what sort of inside and outside sort of come are sort of the boundary inside and outside the text or becomes much fuzzier. Even if that boundary still is important, it's much fuzzier.
Could be. Okay. Okay, I think we'll leave it at that. So that's the end of the sugya here. And as I said, as much as I would be happy to continue along in this, and I left outstanding questions about the placement of menorah. We certainly touched on that, and some other things, but I think we'll have to devote another whole separate year to that. Next week, God willing, we could what?
We could do worse.
We could do worse. Right. No, the only reason I want to move on is because I do want to finish Yoma, and I really do want to start the last chapter now, so that we have at least covered some reasonable amount of ground between now and Yom Kippur. So I think the way we're going to do it is this. I think what we'll do is we'll go through all of Mishnayot in a kind of a cursory fashion, just so we have some basic grasp of the Mishnayot in Perek Shmini. And then I want to go back and do selected sugyot in the Gemara. So as we bring up questions going through the Mishnah, we take note of them and then go back and look at them in greater depth, because that process to try to learn Perek Shmini in a greater depth is also going to take a long time. And I see nobody's in a rush to get anywhere, so the only rush, as it were, is just I want to get through the Mishnayot between now and Yom Kippur, Bezrat Hashem, and then after that we'll back and do things more carefully. So I think that's it for tonight. Thank you. The last thing I'll tell you is also thank you for those of you who sent donations. I'm trying to work out something. It's very complicated with these people in Uganda. I'm trying to get them together to there are various communities that are only sort of loosely connected. Some of them know each other, some of them don't know each other. Right now there is both famine and flooding in parts of Uganda, and that's why it's like a believable situation. So this morning I made a Facebook page that I called the Combined Jewish Communities of Uganda, and I contacted the people I know, and I have to write them now again. I'm going to get them to organize amongst themselves to make a single fundraiser that people can donate to, and then they will distribute the money that's necessary among themselves. So hopefully within the next couple of days, this will be up and running. But thank you for the money that you sent, was certainly well spent. Have a good evening, and I'll see you next week.
Thank you. Good night.